Have you ever felt that life sometimes whispers warnings we choose not to hear? As if, somewhere beneath the noise of our days, there's a quiet voice trying to protect us. But we silence it because we're too afraid of what it might reveal. This is a story about what happens when those whispers grow louder than logic. Louder than expectations and force us to look at the truth we've been avoiding our whole life. It begins in a small, Persifu town where everything seems ordinary. Until it isn't. A young woman named Clara believes she has finally found stability after years of uncertainty. She has a home, a job she loves, and friendships that feel almost like family. For the first time in a long time, she thinks she has found solid ground beneath her feet. But life, as always, has a way of testing the foundations we build. One evening, Clara receives a message, something simple, almost insignificant. A notification that shouldn't change anything. It does. Because inside that message lies a truth that unravels every single thing she believes about herself. And the people she trusts most, as the hours pass, strange details begin to surface. A forgotten photograph, a voice she recognizes but can't place. A memory that feels too vivid to be imagined, yet too distant to be real. And with each clue, Clara is pulled deeper into a story she never asked to live, a story where love and fear walk side by side. Where secrets echo louder than promises, and where the heart learns that letting go is sometimes the only path to freedom. If you've ever questioned your past, if you've ever loved someone who wasn't who they seemed to be, if you've ever stood on the edge of a truth you weren't ready to accept, then this story will speak to you. Stay with me, because Clara's journey might just feel like your own. Before we step fully into Clara's journey, I want you to take a moment and imagine something with me. Imagine standing at a crossroads in your own life, one path familiar, predictable, safe, and the other wrapped in uncertainty, calling you with a quiet, persistent pull. Most of us, whether we admit it or not, choose the safe path. We choose comfort over questions. We choose what we know, but life has its own way of revealing the truth, even when we're not ready for it. Clara had always been a careful soul. She built her world slowly, with patience and intention, arranging every part of her life, like pieces of a fragile puzzle she didn't want to disturb. She wasn't wealthy, nor was she searching for grand adventures. All she wanted was peace, a simple, steady life where she could finally breathe without fear of everything falling apart. But the strange thing about peace is that it often hides the storm, preparing itself behind the scenes. In the weeks leading up to the events you're about to witness, Clara had begun to notice subtle changes, the kinds of things most people overlook. A feeling of being watched when she walked home from work, a shadow that lingered a second too long. A familiar scent in places where no one should have been. Tiny, quiet details that didn't fit. But she brushed them aside, convincing herself she was tired, overthinking, imagining things. We all do that, don't we? We feel something is wrong, but we swallow the suspicion because we don't want to disturb the fragile stability we've created. Yet life doesn't ask for permission to change, it simply does. And for Clara, that change began on a seemingly ordinary evening. The sky was fading into shades of gold and blue, the air carried a soft breeze, and everything looked exactly as it always had. But inside her heart, something shifted. A quiet tension settled in her chest. The kind that forces you to slow down and listen even when you don't understand why. She didn't know it yet. But this was the moment when her past and her present would collide. The moment when unanswered questions would demand to be heard. The moment when every belief she held about her life would be placed under the harsh light of truth. And from here on, every step she takes will bring her closer to a revelation she never expected, one that will test her courage, her memories, and the very core of who she is. So, settle in, take a deep breath, Let yourself feel the weight of the silence before the storm, because Clara's story is about to begin. And once it does, nothing will be the same. Clara stepped out of the small cafe where she worked, pulling her coat tighter around her as the evening air settled over the city like a quiet whisper. Neither cold nor warm, just heavy enough to remind her she was alone with her thoughts again. Alone with the strange unease that had been haunting her for days. The streetlights flickered above her, casting fragile halos on the sidewalk. And for a moment she stopped walking, listening to the distant hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog, the clinking of dishes from a nearby restaurant. All the ordinary sounds that usually comforted her but that now felt strangely distant, as though she were listening from the other side of a thin wall. She took a slow breath and began walking again, telling herself she was being dramatic, exhausted, too sensitive. But then she felt it, that soft, almost imperceptible sensation along her spine. The one that made her heart skip and her steps quicken despite her efforts to stay calm. It was the same feeling she had sensed all week. The eerie awareness of someone's presence sitting just beyond her reach, as if a pair of eyes followed her from the edges of the street. She didn't turn around. She never turned around. She had convinced herself that looking back would make it real, and she preferred the illusion of safety over the certainty of fear. As she reached the corner, her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. She pulled it out slowly, hoping for a message from her sister or a friend. But the screen was blank. No notifications, no calls, just the faint glow of the lock screen reflecting her tense expression. That was odd. She could have sworn she felt it vibrate. She shrugged and slipped it back into her coat, but the moment she did, the street around her grew quieter, almost unnaturally so, as if the world were holding its breath. She paused again, listening. Nothing, only silence, thick and expectant. She forced herself to keep moving, telling herself it was just her imagination. But deep down she knew something. The subtle signs had been gathering slowly, quietly, forming a pattern she had refused to acknowledge. The door of her apartment slightly ajar when she returned home 2 nights ago. The frame of a picture tilted on her shelf when she was certain she hadn't touched it. The faint scent of a cologne she didn't recognize lingering near her bedroom window, a scent that had made her freeze in place before she hurried to open all the windows, letting the cold air sweep it away. She told no one about it. Not because she wasn't scared, but because she didn't want people to worry. Didn't want anyone to tell her she was imagining things, that she needed rest, that she should stop overthinking. She had spent her entire life being told she was too aware, too observant, too sensitive. But tonight, those traits were the only things keeping her alert. She reached the end of her street and hesitated before crossing. Her apartment building stood ahead, tall and quiet, a dark silhouette against the fading sky. The lights in the hallway were dim as always, a dull yellow glow that flickered every few seconds. But tonight the building looked unfamiliar, almost foreboding, as if it were hiding something inside its walls. Her chest tightened. She didn't want to go in. Not yet. She took a step back and pretended to check her phone, although she saw nothing but her locked screen again. She just needed a moment to breathe, to calm the anxious rhythm of her heart. But then her eyes caught something, a movement in one of the top-floor windows of her building. It was too quick to identify, a shift of fabric, a shadow crossing the room, or maybe just a curtain stirring from the wind. She blinked, staring, waiting for it to happen again, but the window remained still, dark, silent. She told herself it must have been nothing. She crossed the street. The old buzzer at the entrance gave its usual static sound as she pressed her code, and the door clicked open. Inside, the familiar scent of old wood and cleaning products wrapped around her. But even that felt different tonight, heavier. She climbed the stairs slowly, trying not to listen for footsteps behind her, trying not to look over her shoulder. Every creak of the floorboards echoed too loudly, Every distant noise felt like a warning. When she reached the third floor, she stopped in front of her apartment and stared at the door. Something was wrong. It wasn't obvious. The lock wasn't broken. The door wasn't open, but there was a subtle misalignment, a tiny shift in the way it rested against the frame. Only someone extremely observant would have noticed it, and Clara noticed. Her fingers trembled slightly as she inserted the key. Before turning it, she pressed her ear to the wood, listening for the faintest sign of movement inside. But silence. She turned the key slowly, pushed the door open just enough to slip inside, and paused again. Her living room was exactly as she had left it. Almost. The blanket on the couch was folded neatly. The glass on the table was slightly moved from its coaster. The hallway light was on. She never left it on. She closed the door quietly behind her, locking the deadbolt, and walked forward with cautious steps. "Hello!" She hated herself for asking. She wasn't expecting an answer, but part of her feared one. Silence. She moved to the living room, scanning everything with trained eyes, looking for something, anything, that would confirm her instincts. And then she saw it. A small folded note placed neatly on top of the coffee table. It wasn't there when she left. Her body froze. Her breath caught painfully in her throat. The paper was plain, white, folded in precise, careful lines. She stared at it for several seconds, afraid to touch it, afraid of what it might say. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she reached for it with shaking hands. The paper felt cold against her fingers, as if it had been left there moments ago. She unfolded it slowly, bracing herself. There were only 5 words written in the center of the page. 5 words that sent a chill down her spine so deep she felt rooted to the floor. "I need to see you again." The handwriting was elegant, controlled, unmistakably familiar. Familiar in a way that made her stomach twist with dread. She read it again and again, each time feeling the weight of the message sinking deeper. This wasn't a stranger's note. This wasn't random. Someone from her past, someone she had tried hard to forget, had been inside her home. Someone she had hoped she would never hear from again. Her hands trembled violently as the realization hit her. He had found her. After all this time, he had found her. And he wanted to see her again. She dropped the note on the table as though it burned her fingertips and stumbled backward, her breath coming in fast, shallow bursts. Suddenly, every noise in the apartment felt louder, every flicker of light more threatening. She grabbed her phone with frantic hands and opened the messaging app. She didn't know who she wanted to call. She just knew she couldn't stay silent anymore. But before she could type a single word, her phone vibrated. This time, for real. A new message. Unknown number. 3 simple words. Did you get it? Clara's vision blurred with fear as she stared at the screen, realizing that whoever had entered her home was still watching. Clara stood frozen in the center of her living room, her phone still glowing in her hand. The message staring back at her like a threat carved into stone, and for several seconds she couldn't move. Couldn't think, couldn't breathe, as though her entire world had narrowed to those 3 chilling words. Did you get it? They pulsed on the screen with a quiet menace, each letter sharp and deliberate, a whisper from a ghost she had buried long ago. The room around her seemed to tilt, the walls closing in with a slow, suffocating pressure, and she felt her knees weaken as adrenaline surged through her veins like ice water. Someone was watching her. Not metaphorically, not in the abstract sense of being followed or sensed. Someone was literally watching her in this moment, aware of what she was doing, waiting for her reaction, anticipating her fear. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stand still, to listen, to determine whether the danger was inside the apartment or just beyond its walls. But the silence was overwhelming, an oppressive stillness that felt unnatural, as if the entire building had collapsed into a void where only her heartbeat existed. She tried to slow her breathing, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles ached. and considered her options, calling the police, calling a friend, running out of the building, but every possibility felt fragile, exposed, inescapably dangerous. And above all, one paralyzing truth pressed against her mind like a cold hand. He knew where she lived. He had her number. He had been inside her home. He was close enough to know she had seen the note. The thought made her chest tighten painfully. She turned off the phone screen and stepped backward until her shoulders touched the wall, grounding herself against the solid surface, as though anchoring her body could stop the panic spiraling inside her mind. She counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3, but each inhale felt thin, each exhale shaky. She needed clarity. She needed to understand whether she was truly alone in the apartment. Slowly, she extended her arm toward the light switch and flipped it off. The room plunged into darkness except for the faint glow of the streetlights slipping through the curtains. Her vision adjusted after a moment, and she scanned the space carefully, searching for any movement. Any shape that didn't belong. Nothing. She edged closer to the hallway and peered down its length. Her heart pounding so loudly she was certain someone else could hear it. She could see the partially open door of her bedroom, the faint outline of the wardrobe, the shadow of the window frame, everything familiar, yet somehow distorted by fear. She forced herself to take one step, then another, her bare feet silent against the wooden floor. She reached the bedroom door and pushed it open with trembling fingers, holding her breath as her eyes darted across the room, her bed, her knitstand, the stack of books on the floor, all untouched. But the window was slightly open, just an inch. Just enough to unsettle her. She never left it open. Especially not at night. Her stomach dropped, and for a moment she felt faint, leaning against the doorframe to steady herself. The cool air drifting through the crack carried a faint scent, the same cologne she had noticed days earlier, subtle yet unmistakable, a scent she knew far too well, one she had hoped she would never smell again. Memories flickered at the edges of her mind, uninvited and sharp, but she pushed them away fiercely. This was not the time to unravel. She closed the window swiftly and locked it, then grabbed the heaviest thing she could reach, a metal lamp from her knitstand. Gripping it like a weapon as she stepped back into the hallway, she needed answers. She needed to know if he was still inside. She checked the bathroom next. Empty. The small storage closet, empty. The kitchen, silent, untouched. Finally, after what felt like hours, she realized she was alone, physically alone, but far from safe. She returned to the living room, placed the lamp on the table, and stared at her phone again. The message still waited for her. Did you get it? She hesitated before unlocking the screen. She didn't want to respond, didn't want to open a door she had locked years ago. But she also knew silence could be a trigger, could provoke him, could escalate things. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly, before she typed 2 words. Who is this? Her finger paused above the send button. She already knew the answer. She felt it in her bones, in her memories, in the dread that coiled inside her stomach, but she pressed send anyway. The message left her phone with a soft swoosh that felt far, too loud in the quiet room. She waited. 10 seconds. 20. A minute. Her hand was shaking when the reply finally came. Don't do that. Her breath caught. She stared at the message, her pulse racing as fear surged through her again. Don't do what? Pretend she didn't know him. Pretend she wasn't terrified. Pretend he wasn't watching. Another message appeared before she could form a thought. You know who I am. A cold shiver traveled down her spine. She did know, but she didn't want to admit it. Not even to herself. She swallowed hard, trying to keep her mind steady, but her thoughts were unraveling too quickly. Images from the past flashed violently, a voice calling her name in a dark hallway. A hand gripping her wrist too tightly, whispered promises that sounded like threats, a door slamming. Footsteps following her, memories she had buried so deeply she hoped they would fade forever. She forced herself to type again. "What do you want?" Her hands trembled as she pressed send. The answer came almost instantly this time, as if he had been waiting for the question. "To talk." She felt a bitter taste rise in her throat. Talk, that word, from him meant everything except what it sounded like. "Leave me alone," she typed, her heartbeat loud and uneven. "It's too late for that," he replied. Panic swelled in her chest, overwhelming, suffocating, and for a moment she considered running out of the apartment. Screaming, calling anyone, doing anything, but the fear of provoking him froze her in place. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was an image. Her breath stopped entirely when she opened it. It was a photo taken from outside her apartment building, her window. Halaichi. The angle was unmistakable. He was somewhere nearby, somewhere close enough to watch her in real time. Tears blurred her vision as she backed away from the window automatically, her voice trapped in her throat. Another message arrived. "Don't close the curtains." Clara stood perfectly still, her entire body trembling, the weight of his control tightening around her like invisible hands. And for the first time in years, she felt the same helplessness she had fought so hard to escape. She dropped her phone onto the couch and sank to her knees, covering her mouth with both hands as silent sobs shook through her. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but he had come back into her life with devastating precision, and this time she didn't know if she had the strength to run again. Clara stayed on her knees for what felt like an eternity, her hands shaking uncontrollably as fear pulsed through her body, thick and unyielding. But eventually she forced herself to breathe, low and slow until the room sharpened around her again and her thoughts began to settle into something she could control. She wiped her face with trembling fingers and reached for her phone with a hesitant, reluctant motion, dreading the screen bad to look. The messages were still there, taunting her, each one a thread pulling her deeper into a nightmare she thought she had escaped. But beneath her fear, something else was quietly stirring, anger. Not loud, not reckless, but slow, simmering, rising from a place she had long buried beneath compliance and fear. She had spent years letting him control her emotions, her movements, her thoughts. She refused to give him that power again. She stood, unsteady but determined, and moved away from the window, ignoring the implied command not to close the curtains. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of obedience, not yet. But she also wouldn't provoke him outright. She needed to be careful, strategic. She grabbed her coat, slid her phone into her pocket, and stepped toward the door, listening for any sounds outside. Silence. She unlocked the deadbolt as quietly as she could and slipped out into the hallway, locking the door again behind her. She didn't have a plan, not yet. But she knew staying inside the apartment meant being trapped, caged under his watchful eyes. She descended the stairs quickly, her steps light and controlled, and only when she reached the outside door did she pause. The street was dimly lit, empty except for a distant car passing by. She stepped outside cautiously, scanning the shadows, the parked cars, the alleys. Was he watching from across the street? From a rooftop? From the building behind hers? She couldn't know. The uncertainty gnawed at her. She walked briskly, heading toward the busier part of town where lights were brighter, where people still lingered outside restaurants and shops. The presence of others comforted her, but only slightly. The fear traveled with her like a second skin. She stopped at the corner, unsure where to go next. She could call the police, but what would she say? A note, a few messages, a photo of her window. He had always been good at staying just out of reach, just within the realm of plausibility, and she feared they would dismiss her concerns the same way people dismissed all of her warnings in the past. Not enough evidence, not enough reason, not enough danger. But she knew better. She pulled out her phone and typed a single message. "What do you want from me?" It didn't take long for his reply to appear. "You ran away. Her chest tightened. She swallowed the surge of bitterness rising in her throat. She typed again. "Because you scared me." His answer came immediately. "I protected you." A shiver ran through her. She remembered that phrase. He used it often, twisting it into a justification for every boundary he crossed, every restriction he imposed, every moment he watched her too closely. She inhaled slowly, forcing her hands to steady. "What do you want now?" The pause before his reply was longer this time, long enough to unsettle her further. Then the message came. A chance. Her breath caught. A chance for what? To talk, to see her, to control her again. She typed carefully, every word chosen with precision. "Where are you?" Another pause. "Close." Her heart thudded painfully. She looked around again, the street, the shadows, the alleys. Every movement made her flinch. Then another message appeared. "You look scared." Her blood ran cold. He could see her. Right now, in real time. She resisted the urge to spin in place like a trapped animal. Instead, she forced herself to stand still, focusing her eyes on the traffic light ahead as if she were simply waiting to cross. Then she typed, "If you want to talk, then talk." Right here, right now. The reply was instantaneous. "Not like this." She clenched her jaw, frustration rising. "Then how?" This time, no answer came. Seconds passed. Then a full minute. 2. She held her breath, watching the screen. Nothing. She checked her surroundings again, slowly, subtly. Still nothing. The silence was suffocating. Finally, another message arrived, one that made her blood freeze entirely. Turn around. She didn't want to. Every instinct screamed against it. But she had to. Slowly, she turned her head. At first, she saw nothing but buildings, streetlights, the faint blur of passing cars. Then her eyes landed on a figure standing beneath a flickering lamp across the street, tall, motionless, watching her. Her breath hitched violently. She couldn't see his face. The shadows concealed it, but the presence, the posture, the stillness. She knew it was him. After all these years, after all the distance she had tried to create, he was here. Her phone buzzed again. "Come." Just one word. A command, a threat, a request. She didn't know which. She stared at the figure, her heart pounding so hard she felt it in her throat, but she didn't move. Couldn't move. Another buzz. "I won't hurt you." A lie. She knew it was a lie. She took a small step backward instead. The figure shifted slightly, as though preparing to cross the street toward her. Her pulse spiked in terror. She turned and ran. She didn't look back. She didn't think. She just ran, through crowded sidewalks, around corners, past cafes and street vendors, until her lungs burned and her legs shook. Only when she reached the brightly lit entrance of a hotel lobby did she stop long enough to catch her breath. She stumbled inside, approached the front desk with trembling hands, and forced her voice to steady. "I need a room," she whispered. "Please." The clerk nodded, unaware of the storm raging inside her, and handed her a keycard. She didn't go to the elevator. She took the stairs instead, climbing quickly, desperately, until she reached the 3rd floor. Only when she was safely inside the room, the lock clicked, and the chain slid into place, did she allow herself to collapse onto the bed. She let out a long, shuddering breath. For the first time in hours, she felt something like safety, temporary, fragile, but real. Her phone buzzed again. She flinched, dread returning instantly, but she forced herself to look. The message was simple, devastating. "You can run." "I always find you." Clara's breath faltered. Fear washed over her in a cold, suffocating wave. But beneath the terror, something else sparked. A fierce, burning determination she hadn't felt in years. This time, she wouldn't run forever. This time, she would fight. Clara stayed on the edge of the hotel bed, her breath shallow and uneven. The room's silence, wrapping around her like a thin sheet that could be ripped away at any second. And she kept staring at the last message on her phone as if the letters themselves might rearrange into something less terrifying, something less inevitable. But they didn't. They remained exactly as they were, sharp and merciless. I always find you. Every instinct inside her wanted to collapse under the weight of that threat, to let fear paralyze her completely. But she forced herself to sit up straighter, gripping the phone so tightly her fingers ached. And she whispered to the empty room, "Not this time." She stood and locked the door once more, checked the window, checked the closet, checked behind the shower curtain, every movement driven by the acute awareness that she was no longer just running from a man. She was running from a version of herself. The one who used to freeze, who used to fold, who used to believe she had no power. She wasn't that woman anymore. She opened her phone and scrolled to her contacts, hesitating for only a second before pressing on a name she hadn't touched in years. The call rang once, twice, 3 times, and just when she thought it would go to voicemail, a voice answered, tired, familiar, cautious. Clara. Hearing her own name spoken by someone safe made her throat tighten painfully. "Eli," she whispered, "I need help." The silence on the other end lasted only a moment before his voice sharpened. "Where are you?" She gave the hotel name, the room number, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound composed. Eli didn't ask useless questions. Didn't ask why now, or what happened, or whether she was exaggerating. He had been there during the worst of it. He had seen the aftermath. He had believed her when no one else did. "I'm on my way," he said firmly. "Don't open the door for anyone but me." "Not even hotel staff?" She nodded even though he couldn't see her. "I won't." She hung up and sank to the floor against the wall. Knees pulled tight to her chest, the minutes stretching endlessly as she waited for the knock she feared. The footsteps she dreaded, the message she expected anything from him, any sign that he was closer than she thought, but the phone stayed silent. No messages, no calls, and somehow that was worse. When the knock finally came, gentle and rhythmic, her entire body jolted. She approached the door slowly, heart hammering so hard it echoed in her ears. "Clara?" Eli's voice came from the other side, low and steady. She opened the door without hesitation, and he stepped inside quickly, locking it behind him before pulling her into a tight embrace. For the first time that night, Clara allowed herself to cry openly, her hands gripping the back of his jacket as she felt her body tremble with exhaustion and relief. He held her firmly, grounding her. After several long seconds, he pulled back just enough to look at her face. "Tell me everything." She told him about the note, the messages, the photo, the figure in the street, the chase. His expression darkened with each detail, a storm gathering behind his eyes. "He's escalating," Eli murmured. "He wants you scared, wants you isolated." She nodded. "He already thinks he's won. Then we take that away from him," Eli said firmly. "We make the first move." She looked at him, confused. "How?" Eli crouched and opened the small backpack he'd brought with him. Inside was a laptop, a portable charger, and something she didn't expect, a small voice recorder. "You said he messaged you," Eli continued. "That's evidence. You said she more evidence. What we need now is proof of proximity." "Proximity?" she repeated. He nodded. "We make him show himself." Her stomach twisted. The idea of intentionally provoking him made her skin crawl. "Eli, he's dangerous." "I know," he said gently, "but you're not alone anymore." "And he doesn't know that." He opened the laptop and gestured for her to sit beside him. "Message him," he said quietly. "Ask him what he really wants." Clara hesitated, fear clamping down on her chest. But after a few deep breaths, she took the phone in her hands and typed slowly, deliberately, "If you want to talk, tell me why now. Why after all these years?" The message sent. She held her breath. Seconds passed. Then the phone buzzed. "Because you're mine." Clara's skin crawled. Eli's jaw tightened. "Good," he muttered. "That's clear intent." Clara typed again, fingers shaking only slightly now. "I'm tired of running." A symbol that appeared on the screen he was typing. "Come downstairs." Her heart stopped. Eli straightened. "He's here." Clara swallowed hard, terror surging anew. "Eli, you're not going anywhere," he said quickly. "He thinks he controls the situation." "Let him think that." Eli grabbed the voice recorder and slipped it into his jacket, then positioned himself near the door. "Give me your phone." She handed it to him. He typed a new message. "I'm on my way." The reply came almost instantly. "I'll be waiting." Eli looked at her. "Stay here. Don't open this door for anyone but me. No matter what you hear. Do you understand?" She nodded, her heart pounding so violently she felt dizzy. Eli stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind him. The next 15 minutes stretched into a suffocating eternity. Clara stayed by the door, listening for any sound footsteps, voices. Anything but the hotel was eerily quiet. Then, finally, footsteps approached, slow, heavy, not Eli's. They stopped directly outside her door. Clara's breath caught. A soft knock. "Clara!" A man's voice. His voice. Her entire body froze. "Open the door." Her pulse exploded in panic. "No! No!" Eli said not to. She stayed silent, clenching her fists so tightly her nails dug into her palms. Another knock, slightly harder this time. "Don't hide from me." She covered her mouth with both hands, tears stinging her eyes. Then the man's tone shifted soft, sweet, sickeningly familiar. "I just want to talk." Clara shut her eyes, trembling. The doorknob rustled softly, testing the lock. Her breath hitched, then, all at once shouting, a crash, a struggle, a violent thud. Clara jolted, pressing her ear to the door, but all she could hear were muffled voices, grunts, chaos. Then silence, terrifying silence. Seconds passed, then a calm knock. "Clara, it's me, Eli." She ripped the chain off and swung the door open. Eli stood there, breathing hard but steady, his jacket slightly torn, a small cut above his eyebrow, but alive. Behind him, 2 hotel security guards held the man pinned to the ground, his face twisted in anger and something far darker. Clara's knees buckled, but Eli caught her before she fell. "You're safe," he murmured. "It's over." The words washed over her like warm rain breaking through a relentless storm. She looked at the man on the floor, his eyes burning into hers, no longer triumphant, no longer sure of himself, but furious, defeated, caught. She felt no fear now, only a profound, liberating calm. Hours later, after statements were taken, after he was escorted away in handcuffs, after the evidence was collected and officers assured her this time he wasn't getting out easily, Clara stepped outside the hotel with Eli at her side. The night air was cool against her skin, and for the first time in years, she inhaled without feeling like the air itself was poisoned. Eli looked at her gently. "You did it," he said. She shook her head. "We did it." He smiled faintly. "What will you do now?" She looked up at the skydark, vast, open, and felt something she had long forgotten, peace. "I'm going to live," she whispered. And for the first time in a very long time, she believed it.